In today's LEGO City update, I'll be building a small hut, a cornfield, as well as starting with some of my interior design work for the buildings. I'm beginning with a small hut, and for that I'm using brick modifieds for the corner modules. And on two sides of the brick modifieds, I'm now placing plates with those 1x1 round tiles with those wood prints. So this actually then is placed right onto the corner and represents the end of the individual wood beams. For the wood beams themselves, I'm now using a mixture of 1x2 and 1x4 brick modifieds with this sort of wave-like structure. If you ask me, this looks exactly as if you have placed several logs onto each other sideways. And of course, the printed 1x1 round tiles are exactly on the height of those wood beams, which I absolutely love. It's all built with the so-called snot technique, so studs not on top. This is why it's a bit fragile, but if you ask me, the looks of this small building looks absolutely fantastic. So having finished the walls, it's now time for the roof, and I'm actually only building two sort of triangles onto two of the walls. And then for the roof itself, I'm connecting it by hinges and then simply laying it on top of those triangles, and gravity basically does the rest. And having the hut placed into the city, it's now of course time to integrate it into the landscape. I'll later on in this video of course place something into the hut, otherwise it looks a bit empty. By the way, this hut is solely meant for storage, so obviously because of the size nobody lives in there. And it's actually inspired by all those small huts you have in the Alps next to meadows and fields where farmers simply store stuff. And this was exactly my thought I had when designing this hut. Now I was just simply placing some bushes and trees around the hut. And with that being said, it's now time for the main part of this week's LEGO City update, the cornfield. And the building technique I'm using, I'm now covering the entire floor where the field is going to be with those 1x2 plates with holes inside the stud, and then using bars with Technic pins attached to them. Before starting with the field, I don't think it's a secret that these videos are extremely expensive, and therefore I'm quite happy to announce that I've managed to get a video sponsor for today's video. Some of you might even recognize this logo already. NordVPN is today's video sponsor, so I've decided to try to build their logo out of Lego. I myself in fact constantly faced the problem of having videos blocked that I was able to watch a few hours earlier because I live in a different country than I work in. And this then leads to content being blocked because of my IP address. NordVPN now allows you to virtually change your location and IP address, thus allowing you to access content that would have otherwise been blocked by your country. So if you too want to benefit of NordVPN servers in 59 different countries, make sure to use my link in the video description for a huge discount, as well as 4 months free on a 2-year plan. It's totally risk-free for you because of the 30-day money-back guarantee. Alright, and now it's time for the madness to begin. I'm starting off by putting down those 1x2 plate modifieds with the hollow studs. And trust me, after some time of doing that, your fingertips really start to hurt because those hollow studs are much more aggressive when pressing them down onto other Lego bricks than normal studs because of the holes. At the beginning, I wasn't quite sure whether I want to have a squared or a sort of round field. I now opted for the squared option, but will later on of course create a transition in order to not have this very sharp edge I'm having at the moment right now. So this is the building technique I'm using. I'm mixing those smaller bars in combination with the Technic pins on top with the taller bars that have this additional ring around the top, and this then creates the feeling that the wheat doesn't grow at the exact height. And this was actually the main challenge I had when designing this field right here, because at the beginning I was only using one single type of bar, and therefore it looked way too monotone and unrealistic. Now I'm creating this transition I was just talking about, so I'm not only placing a few bars outside this squared field, but I'm also extending the dark tan colored underground onto the region around, and also partly covering it with flower stems. And this then actually looks so much better immediately. And now having covered everything with flower stems, it's time for my next little mini build I want to add. It's a Scarecrow, and I always love to challenge myself building something out of as few pieces as possible that still looks realistic. In this case, it was the Scarecrow I wanted to add to the field. I'm once again using a brick modified in the middle with 4 studs. Now I'm adding those pins on the sides and then attaching those grapplers, which represent the arms, a minifigure head without a face on, as well as a head on top. My first thought was to add the Scarecrow directly into the field, but I did not really like that, and then opted for another option and actually placed it next to the field. I think it looks much better there because it doesn't dominate the entire field. Now it's time for some minor detailing work. As I was talking about earlier, I absolutely need to add something inside this small hut, and the reason I'm using dark bluish gray for the barrels inside is because it actually is a contrast color to the brown. If I have a gray area, I prefer to add something that is brownish. In this case, since the building was already brown, I'm now opting for the opposite color, in this case gray, just so you can follow my thought process. Now I've promised you that we also start with some interior design work. In this case, I'm starting with the bakery. I'm first of all adding a counter in front of the oven, and what I'm actually doing is I'm placing muffins and donuts behind this glass wall, and then a cashier around the corner, a table next to the oven in the back of the bakery, and as you can see, the entire floor is built out of dark tan plates, which means I have the stud still remaining, which I'm now taking advantage of because I'm covering every table in tiles in order to create not only a color contrast but also a structural contrast. A few minifigures, of course, in order to bring life into the bakery. The necessary bread, of course, also belongs inside a bakery, and then a few more tables, chairs, and so on. And having that done, I think we have a ton to discuss live in the Lego City. Finally, this last remaining spot in this area of my Lego City has been closed. Unfortunately, when it comes to the wheat field, I ran out of bars in front right here. And also there's another aspect that's not, well, too realistic at the moment when it comes to the field. It's obviously too small. Theoretically, you could argue that it extends into this region where the city doesn't continue, okay? But in my future location, I'll probably need to move in about a year or so because it's not looking too good up there when it comes to the remaining space. But in future, I plan on dividing the city along this line and then adding a line of base plates, and then we have more space for the wheat field. Next up, I of course need to show you the interior of the bakery. I mean, it's pretty basic, but it does the job. The main challenge I'm going to have with that building is the lighting. I will of course add custom lighting at some point to my city, and then with the removable roofs, I of course have a problem with adding lights inside in order to not have some cables attached to the roof. That wouldn't make sense and basically wouldn't work at all. One last thing I wanted to point out, this small hut right there actually has a purpose when it comes to the placement. I've placed it directly in front of the mountain, and as you know, I'm sizing down the scale towards the back of my Lego City, closer to the mountain, and then I of course can't have any of the taller buildings, there for example, placed in this field of view towards the mountain. This is why you can only see this small building right there and then the small hut in front of the mountain. At some point in the future, I'll switch out the pine trees to the dark green pine trees, and I think that's then the final and last thing for this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. And with that being said, I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again in the next one.